When it comes to mastering in dubstep, it's nice and simple. There's one single goal and one goal only. That is, make it as loud as possible. You don't have to think about dynamics. You don't have to think about stereo width or a bit of this or a bit of that. Purely think about making it as loud as possible by crushing it through a limiter. To demonstrate this visually, what I've done is load up 7 very popular dubstep tracks, and you can see just looking at these waveforms that they're completely crushed. I mean, it's just a big wall of sound in every single example, and this isn't me choosing a narrow selection of dubstep tracks. If you look at 99% of all dubstep, it all looks like this. It's a wall of sound, it's completely crushed. There aren't any dynamics between, say, bass hits or the kick of the bass or this and that. It's just completely annihilated, crushed through a limiter. It's just a big wall of sound. Occasionally there's a little bit of a dip for the break before it hits you super hard for the drop again, and then it's just a wall of aggressive sound. Dubstep tracks are so loud that the quietest tracks in dubstep are louder than a normal track in another genre, and the loudest tracks in dubstep are as loud as you can possibly make any bit of audio. It's pretty crazy, and it's also the case that these dubstep tracks are in a narrow band of loudness because of this fact they're all been pushed to the very extreme. Every single track is as loud as it can possibly be, therefore some tracks can be pushed a little bit louder because the mix is a little bit different, but fundamentally they're all pushed to the limit, and so they're all within quite a narrow band of loudness, and you need to be making sure if you're making a dubstep track that it's similarly loud and it looks like this. It needs to be completely crushed through a limiter. However, if you know a little bit about perceived loudness normalization, you may be thinking this is a little bit strange because it doesn't matter how loud you make your track in the waveform in the audio file, people are still going to play it back at the same level of perceived loudness as the track before and after it. For example, if you hear Skrillex on the radio, it doesn't come out 6 dB louder than the acoustic track before it, it comes out at the same level of perceived loudness because the person playing the track back on the radio simply adjusts the gain of Skrillex's track, in other words, turns down Skrillex's track because it's a lot louder. So you may be thinking this is all a bit strange, completely crushing and destroying a track, destroying all dynamics, sometimes even destroying the stereo width because you can make it louder by having a mono sound, stuff like that. It's pretty weird, right? But there is a reason for this. The reason why dubstep producers do this, the reason why they flatten tracks to death, is it's a part of the art. It's a part of what makes dubstep sound like dubstep. In fact, there's a pretty interesting interview on YouTube where Steve Duda talks about this. He talks about how Skrillex was made to send off his track to be mixed by somebody, one of the best mixers in the world one time. It was made to by the label, and when he got the mix back, he just didn't like it. Yes, it was more three-dimensional and more nuanced in the way that you would normally want a mix to sound, but it didn't sound very dubstep. Dubstep doesn't have to be nuanced in its dynamics and its stereo width and its stereo movement. It's all about just hitting you hard and being very raw and very one-dimensional. In the end, Skrillex went with his own mix, which was a lot more raw and more direct, because that's where all the energy, all the passion, all the art is in dubstep. It's all about aggression, and it's just hard to explain, really. It's all about that raw attitude. And this heavy limiting is a huge part of this dubstep sound. Dubstep just doesn't sound right until you've run it very, very hard through a limiter. Let me give you an example of this. So first of all, I'll play before limiting and then after, adjusting for perceived loudness as well. Pretty crazy, right? Did you notice in the first one that it had all the elements of dubstep, but it didn't quite sound like dubstep? But then in the second one, after the limiting was applied and it was completely flattened, suddenly it had that raw, flattened attitude that you come to expect from a dubstep track. Sure, there's some unwanted artifacts, some unwanted sounds, some rough edges that come from this extremely heavy limiting, but that's perfectly fine. That's what makes dubstep dubstep. It's a part of the art. In a later tutorial, I'll give you some tips on how to best use a limiter to get this result, but that is the general idea when mastering for dubstep. Make it as loud as possible and completely crush it.